1821, England. A sealed nursery was found beneath the manor. The Wortham Twins incident. It's the kind of story that makes you question everything you thought you knew about history. A centuries-old manor, hidden deep within the misty countryside of England, holds a secret so dark, so chilling, that its discovery would send ripples through the town, and through history itself. In 1821, the Wortham Manor stood as a symbol of grandeur and wealth, nestled among sprawling gardens and overlooking the quiet, rolling hills of Suffolk. On the surface, it was a perfect reflection of aristocratic England, a stately home surrounded by centuries of tradition, with lush tapestries, ornate furnishings, and a lineage of owners who traced their heritage back for generations. But no one knew what the walls of the grand manor truly concealed, what lay beneath the luxurious floors, behind the delicate walls, and deep within the manor's forgotten corners. For years it remained untouched by the outside world. The residents lived in isolation, their every move guarded by servants, whispers, and the oppressive silence of the estate. And then, in a single moment of curiosity, the manor's darkest mystery would be revealed. A seemingly ordinary discovery, one that could easily have been overlooked, changed everything. Beneath the dust and ancient oak beams of Wortham Manor, a hidden nursery was uncovered, sealed away from the light of day. But this was no ordinary nursery. It held a haunting, inexplicable secret. The Wortham Twins, two children whose very existence was shrouded in mystery, had vanished without a trace years earlier. No one had ever known what had become of them. But the sealed nursery held the key to their disappearance, and perhaps even more chilling truths. What had happened to those children? Who had locked them away and why? The house, for all its beauty, had become a silent witness to tragedy. Beneath its elegant floors, it hid the truth in its dark corners, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The discovery of the nursery would stir the local community. But it would also stir something much darker. Memories that had been buried, long-forgotten fears that would rise to the surface once again. The discovery of the nursery was only the beginning. The manor, which had stood for over 2 centuries, was now an enigma. Beneath its layers of history and faded grandeur, something darker stirred. Something that had been deliberately hidden from prying eyes. A secret so vast that it could shatter the very foundation of everything the Wortham family stood for. No one in the nearby town of Ipswich had ever thought to question the manor. It was simply there, looming on the hill, as old and as enduring as the land itself. The Wortham family had long since withdrawn from public life. The last known heir, Sir Edward Wortham, had retreated from society in the early 1800s, leaving behind only rumors of his deteriorating mental state. Some said he was obsessed with the past, unable to escape the shadow of his own family history. Others whispered that his obsession had led him to madness, drawing him into darker pursuits that no one could understand. But those who still remembered Sir Edward spoke in hushed tones of strange behavior, of late-night ramblings through the manor's halls, and of a peculiar fixation on the family's young twins. These were no ordinary children, and the town had always found their presence unsettling. The twins, Emma and Thomas, were never seen outside the manor's walls. They were often heard, laughing and playing, but never in the view of outsiders. It wasn't until the twins vanished, suddenly and without explanation, that the whispers grew into something far more sinister. No one had seen them leave, and no one could confirm if they had ever been seen again. Some believed they had simply been taken, perhaps by their father, who had become reclusive and paranoid in his final years. Others suggested darker forces were at work, forces that had been pulling the strings from behind the scenes for generations. Then came the fateful day in 1821. It started as an ordinary renovation, a routine inspection of the manor's crumbling infrastructure. The workers were tasked with clearing the old, forgotten spaces beneath the manor's floors, areas that hadn't been touched in decades. The first few days were uneventful, but everything changed when one of the workers stumbled upon an odd, sealed door hidden in the cellar. The door was unlike any other in the manor. There was no keyhole, no visible sign of entry, just a heavy, iron-bound door, sealed shut by what appeared to be a thick layer of dried, ancient clay. The workers stood in silence, the weight of the discovery pressing down on them. With great effort, they pried the door open, revealing a staircase leading further down, into the depths of the earth. It was a room that had not seen the light of day for years, and what they found there was enough to freeze the blood in their veins. The nursery, untouched by time, stood in eerie stillness. The furniture was all there, but something was wrong. The air was thick, the walls damp with the scent of decay, yet everything was meticulously arranged. It looked as though the children had simply disappeared in the middle of their play. Their toys lay scattered across the floor, their small chairs arranged around a wooden table as if they had been expecting someone. But there were no signs of life, only the echoes of a past long gone. But it was the final discovery that would haunt the workers forever. Beneath the floorboards, hidden in a secret compartment, were the remnants of the twins' clothes. Faded, torn, and soaked in a strange, dark stain. The mystery of the Wortham twins had just deepened, and the questions now swirling around the manor seemed more dangerous than ever before. Who had locked this nursery away? And why? The mystery of Emma and Thomas Wortham began long before their sudden disappearance in 1817. Their lives, though shrouded in secrecy, had always been marked by strange occurrences, bizarre behavior, and unsettling rumors. The twins had been born to Sir Edward Wortham, a man who was no stranger to the darkness that plagued his family. His wife, Lady Margaret Wortham, had passed away during childbirth, and Sir Edward had raised the children alone. From the very beginning, there was something off about the way the children behaved. They were quiet, almost too quiet, preferring to stay in the shadows of the manor's grand hallways rather than playing with the other children in the town. Visitors, when they did catch a glimpse of them, spoke of how the twins would often stand still for hours, staring at nothing, their eyes wide, almost as if they were seeing something no one else could. It was this peculiar behavior that earned them the first whispers of suspicion. Was it the grief of losing their mother that caused them to retreat into a world of their own? Or was there something darker at play? Sir Edward, obsessed with preserving his family's legacy, appeared to withdraw further and further into the confines of the manor, leaving his children isolated, surrounded only by servants and the ever-encroaching silence. Local legend spoke of Sir Edward's erratic behavior during this time. He had become convinced that the twins were not entirely his own. Some said that he believed they were not his biological children at all, but that they were somehow linked to an ancient curse that had plagued the Wortham family for generations. Some even claimed that Sir Edward had consulted with occult practitioners in an attempt to understand the strange happenings within the manor. But no one could ever confirm these rumors. Then, in the summer of 1817, the twins disappeared. It was a stormy night when they were last seen. The family had been in the midst of a lavish dinner party, guests filling the long, candlelit halls of Wortham Manor. The laughter of the aristocracy echoed through the grand dining room as the storm raged outside, winds howling against the walls. At some point during the evening, Emma and Thomas had vanished. The servants searched the manor high and low, but there was no sign of the children. It was as though they had simply disappeared into the night. Sir Edward, frantic with worry, ordered the manor to be sealed off, and every inch of the surrounding grounds was scoured for any trace of the twins. But the search proved fruitless. No footprints, no signs of struggle. The twins had simply vanished. Months turned into years, and the mystery only deepened. The townspeople began to gossip. Some believed the twins had been taken, perhaps by their father, who had become more and more paranoid as the months wore on. Others believed that something more sinister was at play, that the manor itself had taken them, as if it were alive, feeding off the darkness that had settled in its walls. But the disappearance remained unsolved, and the Wortham family, once proud and noble, fell into ruin. Sir Edward's health began to deteriorate rapidly. He withdrew from society, spending more time locked away in his study, where it was said he would pore over ancient texts, muttering to himself about lost family secrets. But no one ever saw the twins again. It was only after Sir Edward's death, several years later, that the manor was open to renovations. That's when the sealed nursery was discovered, hidden deep beneath the manor, as though it had been waiting all this time for someone to find it. And so, the mystery of the Wortham twins would only grow. What had truly happened to them? Had they been hidden away by their father, or had something far more unnatural happened to them in the shadows of Wortham Manor? One thing was certain. Whatever had taken place within those walls had left a mark on the manor, and on the town, and it would take far more than a simple search to uncover the truth. When the workers first uncovered the sealed nursery beneath Wortham Manor, they had no idea what they were walking into. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a forgotten room. Another dusty corner of a grand house, long neglected by the passage of time. But as the door creaked open, and the air shifted with the scent of damp wood and old memories, it became clear that this was no ordinary space. The nursery, despite its long abandonment, was eerily preserved. A single room, tucked away beneath the manor's foundation, separated from the world above by layers of stone and dirt. The furniture was old, but it seemed strangely out of place, intact, as though it had been prepared for the children's return. There were 2 small cribs on either side of the room, positioned under the faint glow of a single grimy window. A small wooden rocking chair sat in the corner, its frame chipped with age. Soft toys, ragged bears, dolls with missing eyes, and cracked porcelain figurines lay scattered across the floor. But there was one object that stood out. A tall, intricate mirror, standing against the far wall. It was unlike anything else in the room, tall, ornate, and far too grand for a children's nursery. It had an almost otherworldly quality, the kind that made your skin crawl when you stared into its reflective surface for too long. The mirror seemed untouched by time, its glass clear and pristine. But as the workers gazed into it, they felt something unsettling stir beneath their feet, as if the room itself was watching them. The more they explored the space, the more they began to notice things that didn't quite fit. There were traces of old paintings on the walls, their frames twisted and darkened with age. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the air grew colder as they ventured deeper into the nursery's corners. But it was the feeling of being watched that unnerved them most of all. An oppressive, suffocating presence that seemed to hang in the air like a heavy fog. It was only when they began searching beneath the floorboards that they found something truly disturbing. Hidden in a small, cramped compartment, they found the remnants of the twins' clothes, small, delicate garments that seemed to belong to children far too young to be left behind. The clothes were faded, torn, and stained with something dark and unidentifiable. The workers recoiled at the sight, their minds racing with questions they couldn't answer. Why were these clothes hidden here? What had happened to the twins? The discovery only deepened the mystery. How could 2 children, so young and so innocent, have vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but these haunting remnants in a hidden room beneath the manor? And why had the room been sealed away for so many years, forgotten by the outside world? As the workers began to piece together the strange clues within the nursery, they realized that there was more to the story than they could have ever imagined. The manor, for all its beauty and wealth, had become a prison for the family that once called it home. It was as though the walls had absorbed the sorrow and fear that had plagued the Wortham family for generations. And the nursery, hidden away from the world, had become a silent witness to a tragedy that no one could fully comprehend. But the most chilling revelation came when they turned their attention to the mirror. When they studied it more closely, they began to notice something that had been there all along, lurking beneath the surface. The reflection, though seemingly perfect at first glance, was warped. It didn't show the room as it was, but rather as it had been long ago, when the twins were still alive. The toys were different. The cribs were occupied. And in the reflection, the twins themselves were sitting quietly in the corner, their eyes wide and unblinking. But it wasn't just the twins who appeared in the mirror. There was something else, something far darker, lingering in the shadows behind them. It was as if the mirror had trapped something in time, a moment that would never fade, a memory that would never be erased. What had happened to the Wortham twins in that nursery? And why had their final moments been captured in such a haunting, unexplainable way? The answers were buried deep within the walls of the manor. And as the workers continued their search, they realized that the secrets of the nursery, of the twins' disappearance, were only the beginning. As the years passed, the mystery of the Wortham twins and the nursery beneath the manor grew more entangled in whispers. No one was quite sure what to make of the discoveries beneath the floorboards, but some began to speak of the house itself as though it were alive, breathing, watching. The workers who had uncovered the nursery began to speak in hushed tones of what they had seen and felt, of the mirror, the toys, the children's clothes, but their words were never met with belief. They were dismissed as fanciful, as the imaginings of men who had spent too much time in the dark, alone. But not everyone was willing to let it go. Among those who still remembered the Wortham family, one person in particular became obsessed with the events that had unfolded at the manor. Lady Beatrice, a distant relative of the Worthams, had once been close to Sir Edward. She had watched, in horror, as his mental state deteriorated over the years, and she had seen the subtle but unmistakable signs of his growing paranoia. He had become obsessed with his family's bloodline, with the ancient history of the manor, and with the children who seemed so strangely distant from the world outside. Lady Beatrice had always found Sir Edward's behavior unsettling. His late-night ramblings, his frantic searches through the manor's hidden rooms, his obsession with the twins. It all pointed to something dark that no one had ever been able to fully understand. But after Sir Edward's death, when the manor was opened for renovations, Lady Beatrice felt a strange pull to the house. She believed there were secrets still buried within its walls. Secrets that could explain what had happened to the twins, and perhaps to Sir Edward himself. She was not alone in her suspicions. In the town, rumors had begun to spread about the strange happenings at the manor. People spoke of the house as if it were cursed, haunted by something that had never truly left. Some said the manor was the source of the madness that had consumed Sir Edward. Others whispered that the twins' disappearance was not an accident, but part of something much more sinister, something that involved forces beyond anyone's understanding. Lady Beatrice was determined to uncover the truth. She returned to the manor, armed with the knowledge she had gleaned from her late-night conversations with Sir Edward and her own research into the family's history. As she made her way through the darkened halls, she could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old wood, and the silence was deafening. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for her to uncover the truth. Her search led her to the same nursery that had been uncovered by the workers. But unlike them, Lady Beatrice knew something they didn't. She knew that the nursery had been sealed for a reason. She had heard the stories, the rumors of Sir Edward's descent into madness, of his growing obsession with the twins. And she knew that the nursery was not just a forgotten room. It was the key to understanding what had happened to the Wortham children, and to Sir Edward himself. Lady Beatrice spent days in the manor, poring over old documents, searching for any clue that might explain the strange events. She uncovered fragments of Sir Edward's journals, scraps of paper filled with ramblings about bloodlines, ancient rituals, and a curse that had haunted the Wortham family for generations. As she read, a sense of dread began to settle over her. It seemed that Sir Edward had believed his children were destined for something far beyond the ordinary. He had believed they were part of something much larger, something that transcended time itself. But what was it? What had Sir Edward uncovered in his search for answers? What had driven him to madness? And more importantly, what had happened to Emma and Thomas? The deeper Lady Beatrice delved into the history of the manor, the more she began to unravel a disturbing truth. The Wortham family's legacy was not what it seemed. The family had been involved in something far darker than anyone could have imagined. A secret pact, a hidden ritual, perhaps even a curse that had been passed down through the generations. The twins had not simply disappeared. They had been taken, sacrificed in a ritual that had gone terribly wrong. As Lady Beatrice continued her investigation, she became more convinced that the manor itself was not just a house. It was a prison, a vessel for something far older and more malevolent. And it seemed that the spirits of the past were not ready to let go. The whispers of madness grew louder, and the walls of Wortham Manor seemed to close in on her, as though the house itself was trying to warn her. What had Sir Edward uncovered in the depths of the manor? And what had the Wortham twins become in the process? As Lady Beatrice pieced together the fragmented clues surrounding the manor's dark history, one story stood out above all the others: the story of Lady Margaret Wortham, Sir Edward's wife, and the mother of the twins. It was said that Lady Margaret had been the heart and soul of Wortham Manor, the one who brought warmth and light to its cold stone walls. She had been a gentle soul, beloved by all who knew her, and her early death during childbirth had left an indelible mark on the family. Sir Edward, once a man of reason and order, had never fully recovered from her loss. But Lady Margaret's presence was never truly gone. There were stories, rumors really, that she still lingered in the halls of the manor, her spirit bound to the house by the love she had once shared with her children. Many of the servants spoke of hearing the soft rustle of her gown, the faint echo of her voice, or the soft scent of lavender in the air, traces of a woman who had passed from this world but never fully left. When the twins were born, it was said that Lady Margaret's spirit had watched over them. She had been a doting mother, and the twins, Emma and Thomas, were the light of her life. But after her death, something had changed. Sir Edward became more distant, more erratic. The warmth that Lady Margaret had brought into the manor seemed to wither, and the house grew cold and oppressive. The once vibrant twins, too, became quieter, more withdrawn, as though they sensed the shadow of grief that hung over them. For years, no one understood what had happened to Sir Edward and his children after Lady Margaret's death. But as Lady Beatrice continued her investigation, she uncovered a diary. One that had been hidden away, buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten memories. The journal belonged to Lady Margaret herself, and within its pages, she found a disturbing entry that sent chills down her spine. In her final months, Lady Margaret had begun to notice strange changes in Sir Edward. His behavior became more erratic, his obsession with the family's bloodline growing. He spoke often of ancient rituals, of blood sacrifices, and of something dark that had been passed down through the generations. He had become convinced that the twins were destined for a greater purpose, one that had been foretold by the family's ancestors. But what horrified Lady Margaret most was a passage that described a conversation she had overheard late one night in the manor. Sir Edward had been speaking to someone, or something, that Lady Margaret couldn't identify. He had been mumbling about unlocking the powers of the manor, of unlocking the twins' true potential. She had heard him say, "They are the key. They must be the ones to unlock the gate." The entry ended abruptly, and the rest of the journal was missing. But the implication was clear. Sir Edward had been consumed by something far darker than grief. He had become obsessed with the idea of using his children as instruments to unlock something ancient and unknowable, something that had been hidden in the walls of Wortham Manor for generations. Lady Beatrice, her heart heavy with the weight of this new revelation, couldn't help but wonder if Lady Margaret's spirit had been trying to warn them all along. Perhaps the heartbroken mother had sensed the darkness that was creeping into her family, and perhaps she had tried to protect her children from the terrible fate that awaited them. But in the end, her death had come too soon, and Sir Edward had been left to unravel the very fabric of their lives. As Beatrice continued to read through the diary, she found one final, heartbreaking entry, written in Lady Margaret's delicate hand. It simply read, "I fear what he is becoming. I fear for my children. The house is not what it seems. The darkness is waking, and I cannot protect them from it any longer. If you find this, please, save them. Find the truth before it is too late." Lady Beatrice's heart sank. It was clear now that the manor was not merely the backdrop to a tragic family story. It was a trap, a prison for those who sought to uncover its terrible secrets. Lady Margaret had known that something far darker lay beneath the surface, and her final plea for help had gone unanswered. The truth of what had happened to the Wortham twins, and to the man who had once been their father, was now even more elusive. But one thing was certain. The heartbroken mother, who had once been the light in the manor, had seen the darkness before it overtook them all. And now it was too late to stop what had already been set in motion. Word of the discovery at Wortham Manor quickly spread beyond the small town of Ipswich, reaching the ears of scholars, historians, and even local authorities. What had once been a local mystery began to take on a life of its own, drawing the attention of those eager to uncover the truth about the manor's dark secrets. It wasn't long before a group of investigators was assembled, a mix of scientists, historians, and paranormal experts, tasked with uncovering the full extent of what had happened at Wortham Manor. They arrived on a crisp autumn morning, their presence adding an unsettling air to the already haunting atmosphere of the estate. They had heard the rumors, of course. They had read the reports of strange occurrences, of whispers in the night, of the mirror that had seemingly trapped the image of the twins. But nothing could have prepared them for what they would find. The investigators were led by Dr. Reginald Pierce, a well-known scholar of occult history, whose theories had often bordered on the fringe. He had spent decades studying ancient rituals and forgotten practices, and it was his reputation that had brought him to the manor. He was joined by Clara Davenport, a renowned expert in psychology and paranormal phenomena, who had investigated numerous haunted locations over the years. Together, they hoped to unravel the truth behind the haunting mystery of the Wortham Twins. As they made their way through the manor, their eyes were drawn to the nursery, the very room that had been discovered months earlier, sealed beneath the floorboards. Dr. Pierce stood before it, his fingers tracing the edges of the iron-bound door, his mind racing with questions. It was clear that something in this room had held the answers for so long. But what was it? What had been hidden here and why? Inside, the nursery appeared as it had when the workers first uncovered it. The furniture was untouched, the toys still scattered across the floor, and the mirror standing tall against the far wall. But for the investigators, there was no mistaking the feeling of unease that gripped them as they stepped over the threshold. Clara Davenport was the first to speak. "It feels off," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Like something is waiting." Dr. Pierce nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "This place is steeped in history, history that should have remained buried. There's something here, something tied to the manor's past. And I believe the twins were at the center of it all. They spent hours in the nursery, carefully documenting their findings." Clara noted the odd arrangement of the furniture, the strange placement of the toys, and the unsettling stillness of the room. But it was the mirror that drew their attention the most. It reflected the room in perfect detail, but as they stared into its depths, they began to notice something that the workers had missed. The twins, Emma and Thomas, were there, their faces pale and expressionless. They sat on the floor just as the workers had seen in the reflection before. But there was something different now, something darker. The twins were no longer playing, no longer sitting innocently in the corner. They were staring directly at the investigators, their eyes wide and unblinking. Dr. Pierce moved closer to the mirror, his face illuminated by the faint glow that emanated from the glass. "What is this?" he murmured. "It's as though they are trying to communicate. But how?" Clara stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch the mirror. As her fingers brushed against the glass, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. A chill ran down her spine as she withdrew her hand, her gaze fixed on the reflection of the twins. "Do you feel it?" she asked. "It's as if the mirror is alive, pulling us in." Dr. Pierce didn't answer immediately. He was too absorbed in the mirror's reflection, his eyes narrowing as he studied it more closely. "I've read of such things," he said finally. "Mirrors that trap souls. Mirrors that reflect not what is, but what could be. Could this be one of those?" The idea hung in the air like a heavy fog. Could the mirror really be more than a mere reflection? Could it be a window into the past, or perhaps a doorway to something far darker? The investigators knew they had only begun to scratch the surface. The nursery was the key, yes, but what it hid went far beyond the twins' disappearance. The house itself, it seemed, had become something more than a home. It had become a vessel for something ancient, something that had been awakened by the Wortham family's presence. As they left the nursery and continued their investigation through the manor, They couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The house seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for the truth to be uncovered. And all the while, the mirror stood silently in the nursery, reflecting the faces of the twins, forever trapped between two worlds. What had they uncovered? What had happened to Emma and Thomas? And most haunting of all, what would happen when the house finally revealed its deepest, darkest secret? The investigators, now deeply immersed in the mystery of Wortham Manor, could not shake the feeling that the answers they sought were locked within the very walls of the nursery. But what they did not yet understand was that the nursery was not simply a forgotten room. It was a key, a threshold between the known and the unknown. And there was a darkness beyond the door that had been sealed away for a reason. As they returned to the nursery, the investigators noticed something that hadn't been there before. The air seemed to hum with an unnatural energy, and the temperature had dropped even further. Clara Davenport, normally the most skeptical of the group, felt an inexplicable pull toward the mirror. She stepped closer to it, her breath fogging the cold glass as she stared into its depths. She was no longer just looking at a reflection. She could feel the pull of something on the other side. Something ancient. Something watching. "I think we've missed something," Clara said quietly, her voice trembling with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "This isn't just a mirror. It's like a doorway, a connection to something else." Dr. Pierce turned to her, a mixture of curiosity and unease in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Clara took a deep breath, her gaze never leaving the mirror. "It's almost like the twins are trapped in there calling out, and I think they're trying to tell us something. This room, it was meant to keep them here, but there's something more, something sinister that's been locked away for years." As the words left her lips, the room seemed to grow darker. The shadows in the corners of the nursery lengthened, and the sound of faint whispers filled the air, too soft to make out but too clear to ignore. The investigators exchanged uneasy glances. "We need to get to the bottom of this, Doctor," Pierce said, though his voice betrayed a hint of fear. "The mirror might be the key, but there's more here. We've only just begun to understand what this place truly is." With a mix of determination and dread, the team began to search the nursery again, this time with a far more focused intention. They studied the mirror, the strange furniture, and the unusual placement of the children's toys. It was clear to them now that the nursery had not been used in the way one would expect. It was a place for something else. A containment, a prison, a ritual. But for what purpose? It was then that Clara noticed something she had overlooked before. A small, nearly imperceptible symbol carved into the edge of the mirror's frame. It was faint, worn with age, but there was no mistaking it. It was an ancient sigil, one that she had seen referenced in Dr. Pierce's research, a symbol associated with an occult ritual designed to bind spirits, to trap souls. "Look here," Clara said, her voice tense. "This is no ordinary mirror. This symbol, it's part of a binding ritual. A ritual to trap souls. The twins, they weren't just lost. They were trapped here, kept here." The realization hit like a wave. The twins hadn't simply vanished. They had been taken. Taken by their own father, Sir Edward, who had become obsessed with unlocking the manor's dark secrets. But why? What had he hoped to achieve by sealing them away in this nursery? And what had the house gained in return? Dr. Pierce was quick to piece together the connections. "The family's bloodline," he muttered, staring at the symbol in growing realization. "The ritual, it was never just about the children. It was about power, about unlocking something ancient, something hidden within this house. They were meant to be sacrificed, but it seems something went wrong." Clara recoiled. "Sacrificed? Sir Edward, he did this to his own children." Pierce nodded grimly. "The house, the mirror, the nursery. It's all part of something much older than we ever realized. A dark pact made long before the Worthams ever stepped foot here. The twins were merely the vessel, the final piece in an unholy ritual designed to unlock the power of the manor itself." The investigators now understood that what lay beneath the manor wasn't just a family's tragic history. It was a cursed legacy that spanned generations. The nursery had been sealed for a reason, not just to keep the twins hidden, but to keep something from escaping. The house had become a prison not only for the children but for whatever dark force had been awakened within its walls. It was clear now that the door they had opened wasn't just a portal to the past. It was a doorway to something far more dangerous. And in unlocking it, they had unleashed forces that should have stayed hidden forever. The whispers grew louder. The shadows in the corners of the nursery seemed to move, twisting in unnatural ways. And as the investigators stood there, frozen in place, the mirror began to pulse with an eerie light, as though it were alive, waiting, watching. The truth, it seemed, was no longer something that could be contained. And now they were all part of the story. The air in the nursery was thick with unease, the whispers intensifying into a maddening hum. Dr. Pierce and Clara stood motionless before the mirror, which now pulsed with an unnatural light, its reflection growing darker with each passing second. The room felt alive, vibrating with the weight of secrets long buried, its silence broken only by the low creak of the manor's ancient timbers and the faint rustling of unseen footsteps. Something had been left behind in this room, a piece of history, a clue to the final, tragic moments of the Wortham Twins. But it was not just the remnants of a family. It was something much darker, a residue of the ritual that had been performed here. And now, as the investigators stepped deeper into the nursery, the room seemed to close in around them, its walls whispering of things they were not meant to understand. Dr. Pierce's hand trembled as he reached out to touch the frame of the mirror. He was drawn to it, despite the growing sense of dread that gnawed at his insides. He couldn't explain it, but something about the mirror called to him. "Do you see it?" Clara asked softly, her voice thick with fear. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the reflection of the nursery. But this time, the twins were no longer sitting quietly. They were standing, their pale faces locked in expressions of sheer terror. Their eyes, wide and empty, seemed to follow the investigators' every movement. And for the first time, Dr. Pierce noticed that something else was in the reflection. It was not a child, but a shadow, a dark figure lurking in the corner of the room, watching them with an unblinking stare. Clara recoiled, her breath catching in her throat. "What is that?" Dr. Pierce stepped back, his heart pounding. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's tied to this place. The house, the ritual, it's all connected." As they continued to observe the mirror, they realized that the children, Emma and Thomas, had not simply vanished. They had been absorbed into the very fabric of the manor, trapped in this liminal space between worlds. And the shadow, the dark figure that haunted the reflection, was the thing that had taken them, the entity that had been released by Sir Edward's twisted ritual. But what was it? What had the Wortham family unwittingly unleashed all those years ago? Desperation gripped Clara as she turned to the rest of the room, her eyes searching for anything that might explain what they were witnessing. That was when she noticed it, the crib pushed back against the far wall, covered in a thick layer of dust. It hadn't been disturbed in years, but there was something off about it. Something wasn't right. She walked toward it, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the nursery. When she reached the crib, she found a piece of cloth wedged between the slats, faded, worn, and stained with something dark. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it free, revealing a small, tattered blanket that had once been used by the twins. But it was not the blanket that caught her attention. It was the marks, scratches, claw marks, etched deep into the wooden frame of the crib. Clara's breath caught in her throat. "They were trying to escape," she whispered. "The twins, they were trapped in here." The realization struck like a bolt of lightning. The children hadn't simply disappeared. They had been held captive in the nursery, unable to escape the horrors that their father had imposed upon them. Sir Edward had not just locked them away. He had bound them to this house, to this cursed place. And in doing so, he had set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Dr. Pierce, his mind racing with possibilities, turned to Clara. "We need to get out of here. Now." Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she nodded. But just as they turned to leave, a sound froze them both in place. The faintest sound, a low whisper that seemed to come from the very walls of the manor. It was a voice, soft, childlike, but unmistakable. "Help us." It was Emma's voice, and it was coming from the mirror. The investigators froze, fear washing over them. The twins weren't just trapped in the reflection. They were calling out, reaching out from the other side, desperate for someone to hear them, to save them from the darkness that had bound them to the manor. The mirror had become a prison, and the house, now fully awake, had become a conduit for the unspeakable force that had been unleashed. "We can't leave," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not yet. We have to save them, Doctor." Pierce looked at her, his eyes wide with horror. "How? How do we save them?" The answer, though chilling, was clear. To save the twins, they would have to confront whatever had been trapped within the manor. They would have to face the entity that had taken them, and break the curse that had bound them to this house. But time was running out. The house was waking, and the darkness was drawing closer. The clock was ticking. Every passing second seemed to stretch the air thin, tightening the grip of fear and anticipation around Dr. Pierce and Clara. The nursery, with its forgotten toys, faded blankets, and the eerie mirror, had become a place of unbearable tension. They had uncovered so much already, but the true horror, the thing that had been quietly lurking within the walls of Wortham Manor for generations, was still ahead. As the investigators stared at the mirror, they knew that breaking the curse would not be easy. The twins were no longer just children lost to time. They had become part of the very fabric of the house, their souls bound by the sinister ritual that Sir Edward had begun. But how could they undo a centuries-old pact? How could they free two innocent spirits trapped in a world between the living and the dead? The mirror seemed to grow darker as they stood there, its surface swirling with shadows that shifted in unnatural patterns. The twins' reflections stared back at them, their faces frozen in wide-eyed terror. But it was the shadow lurking behind them that sent a chill down their spines. A looming figure that seemed to grow larger with every moment. "It's the entity," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's the thing that's been feeding on the family's bloodline, growing stronger over the years. And it's using the twins to do it." Dr. Pierce nodded, his mind working furiously. He knew the ancient rituals had been designed to bind a spirit to the house, to make it an eternal prisoner. But this was something different. The twins weren't just trapped, they were vessels, conduits for the dark force that had been bound to the manor. The truth hit him with a terrible clarity. To save the twins, they would have to confront the very thing that had imprisoned them in the first place. But how? How could two mere mortals hope to break such a powerful ancient curse? As if answering his question, a soft sound reached their ears. Whispers, barely audible, but unmistakable. They were coming from the mirror, from the twins. "Help us, please." Clara's heart clenched at the sound. She stepped closer to the mirror, her breath fogging the glass as she reached out with trembling hands. "We'll try. We'll do whatever it takes." In that moment, Dr. Pierce felt a coldness creep over him. A sharp, biting chill that seemed to pierce the very marrow of his bones. The shadow in the mirror was moving, shifting closer. It seemed to reach out, stretching from the reflection into the room, as though it were trying to drag them into its dark embrace. "We need to perform the ritual," Dr. Pierce said, his voice low and strained. "The one Sir Edward started. It's the only way to free them, to banish whatever is haunting this place." Clara's eyes widened. "But you said that ritual? It was a sacrifice." He nodded gravely. "Yes, but we don't need to complete it. We just need to reverse it, to break the bond between the twins and the entity. We need to destroy the mirror, destroy the thing that binds them." With no time to waste, the two investigators moved quickly. Clara found a sturdy iron rod in the corner of the room, her hands shaking as she gripped it. "I'll do it," she said, determination in her eyes. "I'll break the mirror." But as she raised the rod, a new sound echoed through the manor. A deep, guttural growl, low and menacing, like the very walls of the house were protesting. The temperature dropped further, and the air became thick with the smell of decay, as if the house itself was rotting from the inside out. The shadow in the mirror seemed to writhe, twisting like smoke, and for a moment, Clara thought she saw the reflection of something else. Something far older and more terrifying than she could have imagined. The figure behind the twins was not human. It was tall, with an impossibly long body, its face an endless black void with eyes that glowed like embers. It reached out toward them, its hands stretching toward the glass, its mouth opening wide, ready to consume everything in its path. Clara hesitated. "We have to do it now." With a primal scream, she swung the rod into the mirror. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, and for a brief, breathless moment, the world seemed to stand still. The mirror cracked, the shards falling away like rain, each piece reflecting a fragment of the nightmare they had just uncovered. As the last shard hit the floor, the shadow recoiled. The whispers of the twins grew louder, more desperate. And then, as the final pieces of the mirror crumbled away, the house seemed to exhale, a long, ragged breath that echoed through the manor's very bones. For a moment there was silence, and then, the nursery was no longer dark and oppressive. The air lightened, and the shadows in the room seemed to retreat, fading back into the corners of the manor. The twins' faces, once frozen in terror, slowly softened. The oppressive energy that had clung to the room lifted, leaving only the faintest trace of its presence behind. Dr. Pierce and Clara stood in stunned silence. They had done it. The curse had been broken. The twins were free. The house, it seemed, had released them. But as they turned to leave the nursery, something caught their eye. A final clue. Something they had missed in their haste to escape. A single, worn photograph, tucked beneath the crumbling floorboards. In the photograph, Sir Edward stood with a woman, smiling as they held two small children. The twins, Emma and Thomas, were there, their faces innocent, unaware of the darkness that would one day consume them. But there was something else in the photograph, something strange. The woman standing beside Sir Edward had a dark, twisted shadow at her feet, stretching unnaturally long, like the very thing that had haunted the Wortham family. The legacy of the Wortham twins was not one of innocence. It was a legacy of darkness, a story that had been buried beneath the surface of time. And though the twins were free, the house and its legacy would never truly let go. The curse had been broken, but the shadows of the past would forever linger in the halls of Wortham Manor. The legacy of the Wortham twins would never be forgotten.